Yuki Tsunoda has once again been overlooked by Red Bull for that second seat alongside Max Verstappen for 2025. Instead, it has gone to his less experienced teammate in Liam Lawson. And this has outraged Yuki Tsunoda fans because they believe after he's just completed his 4th year in F1 that he has done enough to justify to be given an opportunity in that second Red Bull seat. But my question is, has he actually? Because while Yuki has put in some good performances in his 4 years in that second Red Bull team, RB, formerly AlphaTauri, I've gone back through his 4 years in F1 and, well, I've highlighted some driver-related reasons that might be why Red Bull have decided to overlook Yuki once again. Yes, we probably know the main reason Yuki hasn't been promoted is due to his links with Honda and that partnership coming to an end at the end of 2025 and Red Bull transferring over to Ford. But I do think there are some valid reasons out on track why Yuki may have not been promoted alongside Max Verstappen. So let's have a look at them. Now, a lot has been made about Yuki's mental fortitude. This mainly gets referenced in regards to how he can get very hot under the collar when in the cockpit, and of course we've all heard those radio messages of him getting a bit sweary. But I'm not going to hold that against Yuki in this particular regard, because every driver gets hot under the collar in the cockpit, the adrenaline is pumping all the time, and F1 can be very selective with what messages they decide to air. Every driver does it. We just don't hear it all the time. But with Yuki, mental fortitude doesn't mean just anger. It also relates to how they can hold themselves under pressure situations, whether that be in qualifying when they have one single lap to put in, whether it is wheel-to-wheel racing, and it can be just about race management, bringing the car home and knowing when you're in a point scoring position and not throwing that away. And unfortunately for Yuki, he has done this a number of times in his 4-year career in F1, where he has been in point scoring positions and he's just thrown the race away due to some unforced errors. If we head back to 2021, his first year in F1, his rookie season, he was at Imola halfway through this race, lap 35, and he spun the car while in P8, and he finished outside of those points in P12. We headed to Turkey where, yes, it was a very tricky race, but Yuki navigated qualifying perfectly to qualify in the top 10 in P10 to be exact. And while he was going well in that race, he spun and finished down in P14. We then headed to Mexico for the first time, a track that hasn't really gone too well for Yuki. Seems to be a bit of a bogey track for him. He qualified well in P9 again, but he DNF'd at turn 1. This was the collision that happened between Bottas and Daniel Ricciardo down into turn 1. There was a massive furore there, but Yuki could have avoided this entirely. He was on the outside heading into turn 1 and decided to keep the car on the black stuff rather than bow out across the grass and potentially gain some free positions, but most importantly, ensure that his car stayed intact so that he had a potential of scoring some points later on in the race. Now, yes, 2021 can be attributed somewhat to maybe a lack of experience for Yuki, but as we head on through the remaining years of Yuki's career thus far, we'll see that this isn't just these isolated incidents where this unforced type of error has occurred. 2022 is a much better year for Yuki Tsunoda, but it wasn't a better year for AlphaTauri. AlphaTauri was arguably one of the slowest cars of the 2022 season, so Yuki very rarely found himself in point scoring positions to be able to throw away those points. In 2023, we arrived at Mexico once again, where the AlphaTauri found itself being quite quick. Daniel Ricciardo had put it on P4, but Yuki had a poor qualifying in P15. However, in the race, Yuki had fought his way up into P8, a comfortable point scoring position at what would have rounded off a great weekend for the AlphaTauri team with Daniel Ricciardo a few positions higher. But while eyeing up P7 down into turn 1 on the McLaren of Oscar Piastri, which, fair enough, you're going to go for if you see an opportunity, he failed to take that opportunity, made contact with Oscar Piastri by turning into the corner too early while Oscar was still there, spun around and ended up outside of the points in P12. 2024 was Yuki's best year in F1, yet understandable as it is now his 4th season. He's learnt from the experiences that he's had in his previous 3 years in F1. But while he found himself in more point scoring positions, his season could have been a lot better come the end of the year. In Canada, he found himself in P8 after qualifying and navigated his way through a very tricky race in those changeable conditions. He found himself in P9 come the end of the race, but he went too deep into the third chicane, went over the wet grass and spun the car. Nico Hulkenberg with some mega quick reactions just avoided Yuki, but that was Yuki's race over with. At the Circuit of the Americas, Yuki found himself with 16 laps remaining in P11, chasing down Pierre Gasly, his former AlphaTauri teammate, in P10. Yuki's race hadn't gone so well after a decent qualifying in P9, and his teammate, who had just made a return to F1 after a year out and starting down in 19th, found himself in P9. This was an important point scoring race for Yuki Tsunoda. However, Yuki threw it away by chasing Pierre Gasly up into turn 1 and spinning the car, and due to this, not only did Yuki throw away any opportunity of scoring points for himself and the RB team in this race, he finished down in P14. A week later, we arrived at Mexico, a track where we already know Yuki has not had the best of luck at. And well, this weekend, he not only crashed once, but he crashed twice. He crashed firstly in Q2 on the Saturday, ruining any opportunity that he had of making it into Q3 as he qualified in P11. In addition to that, he also ruined any opportunity his teammate could qualify into Q3 as well. Of course, for Yuki, that's maybe not the worst scenario in the world, but for RB, that's a potential double Q3 that they could have had for both of their drivers and cars. And then on the Sunday, Yuki, on the run down to turn 1, found himself in a 3 wide, and his former teammate Pierre Gasly moved over and wedged Alex Albon with nowhere to go, and Yuki Tsunoda got collected and was taken out of the race before he even reached turn 1, a worse result than what happened in his first ever race in 2021. However, while we should praise Yuki for his super aggressive nature here of trying to outbrake Alex Albon down into turn 1 and pull off an amazing lap 1 turn 1 overtake around the outside, it is still quite a low percentage move, especially when in the midfield. It is very different if you're Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton at the front of the grid and you can see clean air ahead of you. There's plenty of opportunity and time to be able to take to the runoff of the grass. But when you are in the mid pack, there is a high possibility, as Yuki found out, that he is going multiple cars wide down into turn 1. That always poses a very high risk. And well, sometimes the super aggressive nature pays off and we praise it, but sometimes it doesn't. And well, Yuki, who was off the back of a spin and poor performance at the Circuit of the Americas, and of course qualifying the day before, needed to at least have an opportunity of trying to score points and make it to the checkered flag. And well, he put his car into a position that meant that he ended up in the wall, not even making it to turn 1. And these are examples of that mental fortitude that has been questioned. And that's just in point scoring positions. Unfortunately for Yuki, it doesn't end there, because he does have a habit of making numerous silly mistakes throughout his career. Back in 2021, he crashed in France and spun into the barrier in Q1. He was able to compete and finished in P13, but he had the potential and car underneath him to finish in the top 10, just like his teammate Pierre Gasly did by qualifying P6 and finishing P7. In 2022, one of Yuki's most embarrassing moments was him crashing on the exit of the pit lane in Canada. He committed the cardinal sin of crashing into his own teammate at Silverstone, while fighting for P14 and going for a viable overtaking manoeuvre into turn 3, he lost control of the rear on entry, went into the side of Pierre Gasly, and subsequently took his teammate out of the race. In Hungary, he outqualified his teammate Pierre Gasly, but he spun the car in the middle chicane of the Hungaroring and as a result finished P19, 2 laps down from the leader. In Singapore, he qualified in 10th, a good qualifying position at the street circuit, but later on in the race, through driver error alone, he crashed into the barrier and removed any potential opportunity of scoring points. In 2023, Austria, Yuki was having a poor weekend. The sprint race did not go well for him, and he found himself at the back of the grid come Sunday. Yuki made an aggressive race start but found himself on a really tight angle at turn 1. He caught the rear wheel of Esteban Ocon as a result and broke his front wing. This meant that while heading down into turn 4, a couple of corners later, he had a loss of downforce and had to take avoiding action and ended up in the gravel. Later on in the season at Singapore, Yuki Tsunoda found himself in Q2 but unable to set a lap time due to a lockup. Come race day, on lap 1, he found himself also collided with Sergio Perez, which resulted in a DNF. And then at the start of the 2024 season at Bahrain, famously, Yuki Tsunoda was not happy about having to let his teammate by to chase down Kevin Magnussen in P11. Yuki was so upset and angry about this that he actually directed his car towards Daniel Ricciardo in anger on the cooldown lap. This was very dangerous, and of course, Daniel Ricciardo was not happy either. So that right there, with what we've already mentioned, where he's been in point scoring positions, is a considerable amount of incidents and data points to look back on. And unfortunately for Yuki, is that while he has had many a good performance, he's also had equally just as many poor ones. And unfortunately for Yuki Tsunoda fans, if you're still tuned in, that isn't just it with the reasons as to why Yuki may have not been chosen for that Red Bull seat, because I do believe, unfortunately for Yuki, and something that has been overlooked on, is that there is a fundamental flaw in Yuki's will-to-will fighting. Now you may be thinking, hang on a second, Yuki has pulled off some great overtakes in his F1 career. He's one of the most exciting drivers to watch, and I don't disagree, he has pulled off some tremendous overtakes, but he also has a flaw that I have picked up on while looking back through his career, and that is a lack of spatial awareness. Now, this has gone under the radar because it has only happened once per season since 2022. Coincidence maybe that it's because we are in the largest, heaviest F1 cars in history? Maybe. But unlike, say, Lance Stroll, who has, unfortunately, some high-profile incidents multiple times per season, Yuki's hasn't gained that much traction. But looking back upon it, it seems that, unfortunately for him, in each single one of these incidents, he has resulted with a DNF. Now, the first of these, which was Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki in Mexico. Daniel Ricciardo did get a penalty from the stewards because he was deemed to not be far enough alongside into this corner. However, while Daniel was deemed to be at fault, there is still more that Yuki could have done here to completely avoid this incident. It was not like he was completely unaware of Daniel's presence, as Daniel had been hounding him for the previous few corners. Yuki leaves the door open for Daniel for that potential reality of forcing him out of position, which is what Daniel tries to do. So there's Yuki's first fault. Secondly, he doesn't check his mirrors once at all when you check his onboards through this section of corners. He just doesn't expect Daniel to be able to go for a move at all. Now you may be thinking, well, Yuki is entitled to take his race in line. Daniel was never once alongside him until they were both turning into the corner. However, we have an example of how it could have been done, because 2 laps later, Sebastian Vettel was in a tussle with Pierre Gasly and Zhou Guanyu. And while he was fighting Pierre Gasly, Zhou Guanyu decided to take the opportunity in the exact same section of corners to try and steal a position from Sebastian Vettel, even while fighting with another driver in front of him and one behind him. Sebastian Vettel had the spatial awareness to see that Zhou Guanyu was poking his nose up the inside. He left room at the exact same corner that Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki collided, showing us that it was indeed possible to avoid said incident. We then head to 2023 with Singapore, a race that we've already mentioned where Yuki DNF'd on the first lap with a collision with Perez in very similar circumstances with Ricciardo. However, I will say that I believe Perez, if you look at the video footage, is more than alongside Yuki, even more so than Daniel Ricciardo in Mexico, and is entitled to room, and Yuki turns in like he's not there, thus causing Yuki's race to finish very prematurely. And then in Baku 2024 this season, he collides with Lance Stroll, which results in him DNFing. Now, I know what many of you will think. This is Lance Stroll. Of course it's his fault. And I thought the same at the time. But upon review and looking at the footage, Lance Stroll, in my opinion, is sufficiently alongside, again, Yuki Tsunoda before Yuki turns into the corner to be warranted racing room. And well, Stroll tries to avoid the collision by even covering the actual curb on the apex, but Yuki continues to turn in. And there we go, that is 3 separate incidents over 3 years that, while is only one singular incident per season, has resulted in a DNF every single time for Yuki. And well, if you're a top team looking at that, one single DNF per season, especially with how close the top teams are now in their pace, can be such a big difference when it comes to winning either the Constructors' Championship or the World Drivers' Championship. And lastly, and unfortunately, there is still one area to discuss with Yuki Tsunoda, that an area he needs to improve on, an area that Red Bull may have looked at and gone, that's not good enough for him to be promoted into the top seat alongside Max, or it's at least not what we're looking for, because of course when you compare to Sergio Perez, it's still much better than probably Sergio Perez. But the sprint races have not been good for Yuki Tsunoda. Sprint races now, whether we like it or not, are an influential part of an F1 championship. We have 6 of them now. We're going to have 6 next year also. There is potential talk of it being its own championship, but that's not now. It's still influential into how a championship is won. And Yuki has only finished in the top 10 twice in 17 sprint races. Now you may say, he's only been in an AlphaTauri, he's only been in an RB car. I do accept, but yes, some of those races he is limited by the machinery underneath him. However, 17 times is a lot to not even finish in the top 10 either. And it primarily comes from his poor qualifying performances. Now, this is 17 times is not... Twice out of 17 times is not by chance. That's a pattern, evidently. That's nearly a full F1 season of races, sprint races there that he has participated in. And, well, as you can see on your screen, he has only qualified in the top 10 twice, and one of those top 10 performances he finished in was in Miami, where he qualified 15th, and he navigated his way around the first corner carnage very well and finished in P8. But to not finish in the top 10 and to have such poor qualifying performances as well throughout these sprint race weekends bodes the question of how well can Yuki prep a car, because on a sprint race weekend you only have 1 hour practice session before you have to lock in your setup for the sprint qualifying. And this is a pattern now that has occurred. I'd be intrigued to see if this occurs for next season as well in 2025 when we have another 6 sprint race weekends. But he does improve on the race on Sunday as the weekend goes on, but he is definitely not a driver who is able to hit the ground running, it seems, on a race weekend where others have been able to. I obviously don't have all the data to hand, but you can evidently see from the results that sprint races, they're influential to how a championship is won now these days, and you cannot be putting in performances like that. Even in a midfield team, he definitely hasn't had the slowest car every single weekend to not be able to get it into the top 10. So, yeah, something that no doubt Red Bull have also looked at as well. And there we go. Those are the on-track reasons as to why I think Yuki Tsunoda has been overlooked by Christian Horner and Helmut Marko for that second Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen. You may agree with me, you may disagree with me, but I've done the digging and I think those are valid reasons. If I was a team principal, I would have genuine concerns about a driver who's been in F1 for 4 years and is consistently making these mistakes, even if they are putting in those good performances. Of course, you'll never know unless they're given the opportunity whether they will step up and rise up to that opportunity and that pressure, but there is quite a large data point for Red Bull to look back on to see whether or not he deserves that opportunity. Obviously, they've fought otherwise. Yes, I do think the Honda connection has been a big block for Yuki, and that has meant that he had to do something special this season to get over that hurdle of the Honda connection. Unfortunately, while it probably is his best year ever in F1, he has still made just as many mistakes as what he has done in previous years, at least a similar type mistakes, and that's an issue for Red Bull. That's personally what I would look at, is that this is someone who is in his 4th year of F1 and he's still making the same mistakes. He's still struggling on sprint race weekends. He's still throwing away points from point scoring positions. He's still having at least one race per season where he is lack of spatial awareness turning into another driver and DNFing. These are all avoidable mistakes that are within his control, which is what I think Red Bull would also look at. Yes, he has had a number of races which he has been on for decent positions and he's had a mechanical failure or he's been crashed into, but wasn't his fault. But so do other drivers. And the question for Horner and for Marco was whether or not there was enough there for him to get over that hurdle of the Honda connection. And I don't think Yuki's good performances have been enough to do that. Clearly not. I think he still deserves a place on the grid, Yuki. I still think he's an exciting driver, but he still needs to clean up his act. He needs to improve on these areas if he ever wants an opportunity in a top team. And, of course, to stay in F1, because there's always younger, faster drivers coming through who want an opportunity. And if you continue to have crashes and make these mistakes and throw away these point scoring positions, as we're starting to see the field close up in competitiveness, especially when you are looking to score points and the top 4 teams are pretty much securing the top 8 positions, especially with Perez's departure now, you would suspect, that leaves only 2 point scoring positions on the grid for every single race most of the time. We know that won't be the case because of mechanical failures and incidents and so forth, but that's what these top teams, the bottom 6 teams, are fighting for, is 2 points finishing positions every single race moving forward. And you can't be going into races and throwing those points away by making these mistakes, which Yuki has done in his career. So yes, just reasons other than him being overlooked for reasons off track being an influence. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Yeah, I think it's always good to look back and make this sort of analysis. So yeah, still looking forward to Yuki Tsunoda's career though, and hopefully he can dig deep and put in a good showing next year at RB and move on to pastures new in 2026.